this Ramadan.
سكن الليل أصغي إلى وقع صدى الأنات في عمق الظلمة تحت الصمت على الأموات. صرخات تعلو تضطرب، حزن يتدفق يلتهب، يتعثر فيه صدى الآهات في كل فوائد غليان، في الكوخ السكان أحزان، في كل مكان روح تصرخ في الظلمات، في كل مكان يبكي صوت. هذا ما قد مزقه الموت، الموت الموت الموت. يا حزن النيل صارخ مما فعل الموت. طلع الفجر أصغي إلى وقع خطى المشين، في صمت الفجر أصغي انظر ركب الباكين. 10 أموات 20 لا تحس أصغي للباكين. أسمع صوت الطفل المسكين. موتى موتى ضاع العدد. موتى موتى لم يبقى غد. في كل مكان جسد يندبه محزون. لا لحظة إخلاد لا صمت. هذا ما فعلت كف الموت. الموت الموت الموت. تشكو البشرية تشكو ما يرتكب الموت. الكوليرا في كهف الرعب مع الأشلاء، في صمت الأبد القاسي حيث الموت دواء. استيقظ داء الكوليرا حقدا يتدفق موتورا. هبط الوادي المرح الوضاء يصرخ مضطربا مجنونا. لا يسمع صوت الباكين. في كل مكان خلف مخلبه أصداء. في كوخ الفلاح في البيت لا شيء سوى صرخات الموت. الموت الموت الموت. في شخص الكوليرا القاسي ينتقم الموت. الصمت مرير، لا شيء سوى رجع التكبير. حتى حفار القبر ثوى لم يبق نصير. الجامع مات مؤذنه، الميت من سيؤبنه. لم يبقى سوى نوح وزفير. الطفل بلا أم وأب يبكي من قلب ملتهب. وغدا لا شك سيلقفه الداء الشرير. يا شبح الهيضة ما أبقيت، لا شيء سوى أحزان الموت. الموت الموت الموت. يا مصر شعوري مزقه ما فعل الموت. At night, listen to the echoes of wailing falling into the depths of darkness beneath silence upon the dead. Screams rise, agitated, sorrow flows, infected. Through it crawls the echoes of pain in every boiling heart. In the hut, lived in by sorrow, in each place, a soul screeches in the dark. A voice weeps in each place. A voice weeps in each place. They are dead, they are dead, they are dead. O blue sorrow, who death caused to howl, it is dawn. Listen to the footsteps marching, falling in the silence of dawn. Listen, look at the mourners assembled. 10 dead, 20 dead, countless dead. Listen to the mourners. Listen to the voice of the poor child. Corpses, corpses, countless corpses, corpses, corpses. There remains no tomorrow. In each place, a body scarred by grieving, not a perennial moment nor silence. This is the work of death's hand. They are dead, they are dead, they are dead. Humanity pleads, asks, who brought this death? Cholera. In the cave of terror, among the bodies, in the harsh silence of eternity, where death is a cure, cholera awakens, a resentful running motor. The valley, merry and pure, froze. It screamed in agitated madness. No one heard the mourners. In each place, its applause birthed echoes. In the peasant's hut, in the home, nothing but the screams of the dead. They are dead, they are dead, they are dead. Cholera's cruel spirit avenged death. The silence is obstinate. There is nothing but the response to refrains. Even among the buried gravediggers, nothing remains. The mosque's mueddin has died. Who will eulogize the dead? Aside from wailing and resignation, nothing remains. Children with no mother or father, tears from an infected heart, seized tomorrow without doubt by the wretched disease. O spirit of cholera, you did not leave behind anything but the grief of death. They are dead, they are dead, they are dead. O Egypt, death has torn my emotions to shreds. That was the poem Cholera by Nazik Al Malaika. Nazik Al Malaika was a Iraqi poet. She was born in Baghdad in 1923 and passed away in Cairo in 2007 at the age of 83. She was considered something of a revolutionary in Arabic poetry, and the poem Cholera itself was also a revolutionary poem. Al Malaika was one of the first poets to write in free verse, or what she called in Arabic الشعر الحر, which is not quite the same as what we call free verse in English. Despite freeing herself from the very technical structure of what we call in Arabic amudi poetry, which is poetry where you'll have one line of text and another line of text after it, she remained committed to Arabic meter and rhythm. She once said, meter is the soul that electrifies the literary material and transforms it into poetry. It's easy to see why she was so committed to meter. Her father was a poet of good repute. Her mother was a poet of good repute, and her father was a poet of zajal, which is a traditional form of oral poetry, usually in a vernacular dialect, so not in formal standard written Arabic, and usually sung along to a rhythm or a drum beat. This poem, Cholera, was the first of this type of poem. It was committed to a traditional Arabic meter, so you would have heard the rhythm, al-mawtu, al-mawtu, al-mawt, death, death, and death. But it didn't rely on columns in the way of Amudi poetry. She didn't regard it as being kind of an escape from the tradition of Arabic poetry, but rather a way of reimagining it and a new way of preserving it. Another way in which this poem represents something of a revolution is that female poets traditionally were focused on the genre of elegies, poems written to, commemorate dead people, usually for men of power and importance. But Al Malaika, however, whose writing usually, uses these motifs of darkness and death and sadness and sickness, all linked with the genre of the elegy, turned her focus towards subjects who rarely had elegies written about them. So mainly, in her case, women and the poor. Another of her most famous poems, for example, is titled "An Elegy for a Woman of No Importance." Part of her doing this was an attempt to turn elegies into a genre that called for revolution. The literary critic, so coming back to the poem Cholera, the literary critic, Muhammad Abdul Muttalib, tells us that this poem was based on hearing, and that's why it was so committed to this rhythm, this meter. It kind of revolves or was based on an announcement on a radio station in Egypt that announced the outbreak of cholera pandemic in 1947, and how every day the victims were increasing, and how this particular poet, Nazik Al Malaika, is trying to find a way of coping amid this massive tragedy of people dying every day. So the two main terms, according to the critic Abdul Muttalib, create what he calls a sad writing field. So night kind of makes us think of darkness. Death, which is mentioned many times over and over again, makes us think of pain, cries, and tears, to refer to the work of the critic. So this kind of sets us up, actually, if you're reading it as sort of a traditional literary critic, sets us up for actually something of a romantic style of poetry. But then, of course, there's yelling, there's screaming, and of course I have this microphone here and I don't want to burn out my listeners' ears, and so I couldn't quite recite it in that way. But I think many people get the idea. Um, so just to kind of quote the critic Abdul Muttalib one last time, he says, "It seems the poetic culture rooted in Nazik's consciousness transformed the day into an extension of the night, which means salvation was delusional. This type of expression was already seen in a poem by Imrul Qais. Imrul Qais, of course, the famous pre-Islamic Jahili poet, who we kind of often refer to actually as one of the founding fathers of Arabic poetry. The poem itself also uses imagery of how people describe the scenes in Gaza today: shortages of medical supplies, sick people everywhere, and of course the word ashla, which is really a word that should make one's bones shiver. Ashla in Arabic refers to scattered and dismembered body parts. And I mention this because it's important to point out that genocides, just like genocides, which are inflicted by governments as a means of killing people, the decisions that lead to the outbreak of sickness and pandemics are also decisions that are made by governments and are man-made decisions. I mean, we saw that very clearly a few years ago with the outbreak of COVID, when a lot of funding for preventative medicine was cut by a lot of states due to policies of neoliberal austerity. Al Malaika wrote this poem also in part to show how difficult it is to deal with this much death and this amount of death around you. And of course, this poem was written in 1947, when your main way of knowing about death at this scale was either to listen to the radio if you were within the right listening range, or to read it in the news. Of course, a few days later, because that was how the news cycle worked back then. But we are currently right now in the throes of coping with, large-scale death and destruction in a similar way as we witnessed genocide in Palestine and in other places as well, on our phones and on our screens every day, almost in real time. We're seeing it happen live rather than waiting to hear about it on the radio or to read about it in the news. We're actually seeing the videos of what's going on. And so not losing sight of the fact that, of course, the primary victims of genocide are the people who are in the places where it's happening immediately. So in Gaza and in the DRC, for example, as we just discussed with our previous guest. This period is also traumatic for those of us who have to witness it. And the sickness that we feel from it, of course, is part of our humanity. So we make dua, of course, this morning and this fine day in Ramadan, that Allah relieve the people who are suffering from genocide and who are suffering from disasters that are the result of bad policy decisions made by bad politicians. And that Allah, of course, constantly keep us sensitive to that and not let us become desensitized and harden our hearts to the suffering of our brothers and sisters and siblings. And on that note, we go to a break before receiving our next guest.